Right, so the Israeli three-part peace plan, or at least it is Israeli according to the administration of Genocide Joe Biden, has fallen apart before it got anywhere really, as was pretty much expected. But also as surely as night follows day, the blame game is all fingers pointing at Hamas for refusing to agree to it apparently. This has been a political charade from the get-go. Israel never proposed a peace plan. The last thing Netanyahu wants is peace. He wants his total victory. And now he's lost the centrist elements to his coalition as national unity ministers quit his government over the weekend. He is even more swayed by the far right of his coalition, who want to assimilate Gaza into the Israeli state and open it up to settlers, whilst getting rid of the Gazans to make room for them. Ethnic cleansing is what these maniacs want. This peace plan was always an American invention, portrayed it as Israeli, even as Israel denied it was an attempt to divert blame for any issues from falling on Israel. And now that it has inevitably fallen apart because Israel were never honest brokers in this deal, Hamas are the ones who still get blamed for that. The blame, as ever, most of all, needs to fall on Joe Biden, who, no matter what, still it seems refuses to hold Israel to account for anything. Right, so Joe Biden's three-point peace plan. It was always his plan, and in truth it held promise, even if, at least publicly, it was light on detail. A ceasefire and phased release of hostages, followed by withdrawal of Israeli troops, get aid in, make the ceasefire permanent, and rebuild Gaza. In essence, that is what it all amounted to. It was sold as Israel's idea by the US and was taken to the UN Security Council, though even the mainstream media made it abundantly clear this was a US drafted resolution, and fundamentally, if it had been drafted by anyone else, given the US propensity to veto every other attempt at a peace plan, it would have been vetoed again. Here's an excerpt from The Independent on that vote. The UN Security Council on Monday adopted a US-drafted resolution endorsing a ceasefire plan to end the 8-month war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza in 3 phases. The Security Council also rejected any attempt at demographic or territorial change in the Gaza Strip, including any actions that reduced the territory of the Palestinian enclave, according to the resolution. Hamas, its ally the Islamic Jihad group, and the rival Palestinian Authority of President Mahmoud Abbas welcomed the resolution, which calls on Israel and the Palestinian militant group to fully implement its terms without delay and without condition. The resolution was approved by an overwhelming majority, with 14 of the 15 Security Council members voting in its favour, while Russia abstained, citing a lack of clarity. Well, there wasn't much clarity. There was very little detail at all, but it would have moved things forward to an extent. And even The Independent, you will have noticed, and my reason for including this excerpt, stated that Hamas welcomed this news. You will note Israel was not mentioned as having welcomed it because, well, they didn't. There have been claims that the US would stop arming Israel if they didn't agree to this plan, to try and strong-arm them. But for one, who believes for 1 second Biden and Blinken would ever do that? And for two, if Netanyahu so much as breathes in the direction of a ceasefire deal that ends up with Gaza being left outside of their control again, his 2 far-right coalition ministers and their parties, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, will be out of the door, and without them, Netanyahu's government and his power will collapse immediately. Nothing trumps that very simple fact. Holding on to power is all that matters to him, and in that vein, Israel cannot afford to stop this conflict, and little effort is being made to force the issue by the US, who have more sway on that score than anyone else, or the rest of the world, UN or whoever. Therefore, some epic political contortionism has had to go on. We began with Biden telling us Israel had called for a ceasefire, to which elements of the Israeli government said, no, we haven't. Biden said he'd negotiated the ceasefire. He had the plan, but it was Israel's plan, really, you understand. To which Israel said, no, you haven't, and no, it isn't, and there's no agreement at all. Biden comes out with the ceasefire will begin soon, with Israel saying, no, it won't. There is no ceasefire. What is going on, it seems to me, rather than any semblance of a ceasefire happening or any desire for there to be one, is actually the United States trying to move global narrative on who is at fault here, trying to get the blame back onto Hamas and off of Israel, getting Israel off the hook thereon by their own genocidal actions. But with Gaza having been razed to the ground north to south, and 37,000 people in Gaza having been killed and counting, it is frankly insulting that the US is still trying to rehabilitate Israel's reputation. And I do have something to base this line of thinking of mine on. You see, as much as Hamas welcomed news of this ceasefire, this plan, they did want some guarantees from the United States. They certainly weren't buying this as having come from Israel any more than anyone else has been. The first part of Biden's three-part plan was a 6-week ceasefire, during which there would be a phased release of some hostages. Hamas wanted cast-iron guarantees from the US over this, the US claiming Israel had agreed to the plan, despite an actual fact they very much hadn't and haven't since. Speaking via Egyptian mediators as they have been in these negotiations, Hamas asked for guarantees that the second phase of Biden's plan, which would make the ceasefire permanent and initiate the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza, would happen autonomously straight after that first phase ended. That lack of clarity Russia cited at the UN Security Council very much a legitimate concern, because Hamas had that same concern as well. Now, this surely should have been an academic thing to offer up. It would have been if I honestly believe the US were interested in a peace plan here, rather than rehabilitating Israel, helping to get Netanyahu off the hook in the eyes of the global public. But there's no chance of that. Instead, Hamas have come under attack by the US, which is not what you do when you want someone to agree to a peace plan, is it? Secretary of State Antony Blinken, possibly the only member of Biden's administration even more devoutly Zionist than he is, has accused Hamas of changing the deal, of changing the parameters, of making it unworkable. Now, Biden has said that if the first phase takes longer than the 6 weeks that have been planned for it, it could be extended. And the implication that Blinken is making is that Hamas have beef with that. But that is actually fudging matters, because they've just asked for guarantees concerning the transition between Phase 1 and Phase 2. They have not quibbled over the length of time Phase 1 might actually take. Instead of meeting what are ostensibly quite reasonable, I think, demands for guarantees, the US administration has accused Hamas of wrecking the peace plan entirely, despite it having to be reiterated that Israel never agreed to it, and the only person who was saying they had was Antony Blinken. This triggered a scathing statement from Hamas themselves, and as much as I feel the need at this point to reiterate that I do not support the atrocities committed by Hamas any more than I do what Israel has done, the statement they've issued does, I feel, pretty much nail matters and lays the finger of blame for the failure of a ceasefire to materialise at the feet of Biden and Blinken, which I think is the right place to lay it at this moment, who certainly aren't helping matters, they're functionally hindering them. The Hamas movement has demonstrated in all stages of the negotiations to stop the aggression the positivity required to reach a comprehensive and satisfactory agreement based on the just demands of our people for a final cessation of aggression, a complete withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, the return of the displaced, reconstruction, and the conclusion of a serious prisoner exchange deal. Below, we clarify the movement's positions towards proposals to stop the aggression. First, Hamas has dealt positively and with national responsibility with the latest proposal and all proposals to reach a ceasefire agreement and release the detainees. Second, the proposal that Hamas received from the mediators on the 5th of May was approved in announcement the very next day, as we delivered our response on May 6th, which was considered by the mediators and all parties to be positive and encouraging, while Netanyahu's response to Hamas's agreement was to attack Rafah and escalate its aggression against our people throughout the Gaza Strip. Third, the movement clearly expressed its positive position on what was included in US President Joe Biden's speech on the 31st of May 2024, in which he called for a permanent ceasefire, the withdrawal of the occupation forces from the Gaza Strip, reconstruction, and an exchange of prisoners, while we only heard from the occupation government, led by the terrorist Netanyahu, emphasising the continuation of the genocide war and attacking the proposal that came from President Biden, in contrast to the claim that the occupation had agreed to it. Fourth, the movement welcomed the Security Council resolution and its emphasis regarding a permanent ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, complete withdrawal from it, the exchange of prisoners, reconstruction, the return of the displaced to their areas of residence, the rejection of any demographic change or reduction of the area of the Gaza Strip, and the introduction of the necessary aid to our people in the Strip. The movement confirmed its readiness to cooperate with the mediator brothers to enter into indirect negotiations on the implementation of these principles in line with the demands of our people and our resistance. Fifth, in return for that, the world did not hear any welcome or approval from Netanyahu and his Nazi government to the Security Council resolution, but rather they continue to emphasise the rejection of any permanent ceasefire, in clear contradiction of the Security Council resolution and President Biden's initiative. Sixth, while Blinken continues to talk about Israel's approval of the latest proposal, we have not heard any Israeli official speak of this approval. Seventh, we consider the positions issued by US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, through which he attempted to exonerate the Zionist occupation, wash his hands stained with the blood of innocent children, women and the elderly, and hold the movement responsible for obstructing reaching an agreement, a continuation of the American policy of complicity in the brutal genocide war against our Palestinian people, which allows the occupation to continue its crime with full American political and military cover. In this context, we call on Mr. Blinken and the administration of President Biden to direct pressure on the fascist occupation government, which is determined to complete the mission of killing and genocide in flagrant violation of all international laws and treaties. So what do you think of that statement then? Fair or unfair? The US have always been on Israel's side throughout this conflict. Blinken, arguably, nobody more so than him. And that isn't changing. Instead of seeking peace, they are seeking rehabilitation for the genocidal regime and trying to get back to the point where it was Israel good guys, Hamas bad guys, when it has never been that black and white. Both have committed atrocities. One is an occupier of the other's lands, and somehow we're supposed to believe they're the righteous ones, though. That ship has long sailed now. Meanwhile, for as much as the UN have supported this peace plan, they've also chosen to blacklist the Israeli Defense Force by including it on the annual list of nations and organizations known to cause harm to children in armed conflict. No matter your personal feelings with regards to what is happening in Gaza and Israel, children should never be seen to be at fault, though sadly many Israelis and the IDF clearly don't think that way to end up on this list. Hamas are on it too, though, making the Israeli complaint seem all the more profane. Get the details of this story in this video recommendation here, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.